promised Lyra that I would be disruptive, so I'm not showing slides. So hopefully I'll get to this quickly, not put too many to sleep. I've kind of prepared my talk because it's actually something that I started to kind of bring up in the Smart Geometry conference in Munich in March. And this is something that I've kind of developed over time, and hoping to get some response from today. As a practitioner, I've decided to give myself the uncomfortable task of taking an ideological position without relying upon my work to do the speaking for me. This is due to the fact that I've been invited to participate on the panel precisely because of my enthusiasm for the very subject of my criticism, drinking the Kool-Aid, as one might say. Yet I feel the stakes are high enough to risk having my club membership revoked. I see this panel as an opportunity for one big group confession. My name is Steve, and I am a non-believer. My apostasy is not without reason. Like many on this panel, I have been drawn to the gospel of architectural complexity because of what it promises to do. Yet aside from producing a devout following of starry-eyed students and young professionals, eager to consume the next glossy publication, flashy software technique, or fashionable academic program, I'm not convinced that it actually does anything, or at least it hasn't done anything yet. Counter to the positioning of this panel, I propose that complexity is neither an inevitable nor a particularly desirable aspect of contemporary design. Yes, design is a complex undertaking, but complexity, particularly of the procedural or metaphorical variety, should never be our intended goal. So rather than using the next 7 minutes to demonstrate my authority over the subject through a barrage of seductive imagery, I have no slides, I would like to strip away some of the posturing and communicate as openly as possible. I feel this is particularly urgent because my generation's has a sense of optimism and purpose. We run the risk of being misguided by the intellectual and practical baggage passed down from prior generations. This is by no means a post-critical hymn for the abandonment of criticality, but rather an attempt to redirect the focus of the conversation toward what should be done. Even with the varied and difficult pressures that we face with each new project, we are in a position to lead through action, not through speculation. Many of the current academic tastemakers, Robert Solmel most prominently among them, have made convincing and, I believe, accurate connections between our current obsessions with procedure and objectifiable criteria with the previous generation's cult of authenticity and legibility, best represented through Kenneth Frampton's Tectonics and Peter Eisenman's Index. Sorry, this is a bit architecture critic heavy. Despite the current rhetoric of evolution, adaptation, and open-endedness, we've inherited the practice of justifying aesthetic biases through autonomous design procedures and criteria of evaluation, which result in designs that are deterministic and immutable. But unlike Solmel and others in the post-critical camp, who have anointed Koolhaas as their new messiah, I'm unwilling to accept the projective practice as one that apathetically reflects the world as it exists back onto itself. Without digressing into discussions about virtue, I believe a truly projective practice should strive to create an alternative world that is better than the one we currently inhabit. This is where my position resonates most closely with one taken by Reinhold Martin. Martin uses the debacle of the World Trade Center design competition as the basis of an incredibly lucid and nuanced argument for the necessity of serious critique and reflection, in face of increasing ambivalence or ignorance or denial of the broader consequences of our decisions. His is a pointedly political and academic challenge, from which one could extrapolate an ethical one. But for this panel, I would like to posit a more pragmatic, but equally imperative one: the impact of our decisions on our environment. Along with such effusive claims as bottom-up self-organizing systems, material behaviors, modulated environments, emergent morphologies, and heterogeneous spaces, one of the key concepts underlying the current complexity rhetoric is an interest in performance, and in particular environmental performance inspired by natural systems. Commonly referred to as bionics or biomimicry within the scientific community, this approach has been rebranded as morpho-ecological design by some of its proponents within architecture. And despite claims of a higher order performance capacities of an architecture based on multifunctional systems, a quick browse through any of these publications should make it obvious why morphology comes first. Ecology is simply a convenient and trendy crutch used to prop up formal experimentation. Counter to the position of this camp, at this point, we should all be suspicious of any explicit claims of novelty or radicalism. As history has shown time and time again, this generally translates to simply not wanting to deal with the messy details of reality, because they are either too ordinary, too trivial, not our responsibility, or just too difficult. But if we are indeed sincere about meeting this challenge through actual solutions and not mere speculation, we have no choice but to engage at every level, particularly when the results are not readily indexed by form. For example, on one of our projects, where environmental performance has been a key criterion, we have spent exponentially more time working with our client and engineers to sift through the issues relating to scope, responsibility, and liability than on any specific aspect of performance. Early on, we found ourselves working with our engineer to educate the client about the environmental impact of their electrical plug load requirements, pretty mundane, which would account for more than half the energy consumed by the building and completely undermine any high-performing active or passive strategies that we could propose. Although they reduced their equipment, by working closely with them, we were able to have a significant impact on how the loads were distributed throughout the building, thus optimizing systems and substantially decreasing the operational energy of the building. In another situation on this project, we waited for nearly 2 months for our engineers to deliver 2 specific performance criteria, solar heat gain coefficient and window-to-wall ratios, that we could use to guide the development of the building enclosure. Why? Because they were unaccustomed to being asked to supply this information to an architect as an early design criteria, and they were hesitant to provide numbers that they could ultimately be held responsible for. And bear in mind that this is one of the leading engineering firms in the world working on a marquee project for an incredibly wealthy and progressive client. These 2 incredibly mundane but potent examples demonstrate the range of professional responsibility required to take environmental performance out of the studio and into the real world. Our capabilities to respond to these challenges are not determined by our abilities to simulate physical behavior, develop hundreds of alternative configurations, or generate natural complexity. They are determined by the incredibly complex social, cultural, financial, legal, and knowledge-based relationships that we have developed within the building community over the past century. These relationships are governing how and to what extent architects are going to be able to direct the development of our material culture and this and the next generation and truly realize performance-based